Hello and welcome to the 20th NFT Guild Roundtable. Today we have Thaddeus Diamond here with us to tell us about his CIP number 71. It's a new standard for on-chain voting in NFT projects without the need for governance tokens. So yeah, Thaddeus is going to give us a quick presentation about it, explain it, and we'll have some discussion. Thaddeus, the floor is yours. Yes.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Yeah. Let me make sure it's up here. So can everyone see my screen? Cool. Is it in presenter mode now? It's all fancy. Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. So a little bit about me. So I'm Thaddeus Diamond. I go by Oddest Human Dad on my handle. And I'm the creator, artist, developer of WildTangz, which is a PFP project on Cardano that minted last year and used the funds to support open source software development, as well as tools for other creators to help build what they want to build. So as part of my work on Cardano, I started thinking about how to do voting, right? And just to tell you a little bit more about from an NFT perspective, I'm in the US, so a lot of this is kind of, it's undefined as of right now. It's still kind of proceeding through legal gray areas. So what I wanted to do is I wanted a way to get non-binding votes from my community that I could use to help guide my open source development. So it was really a way that I wanted to incorporate feedback on chain, but not have to go through any, sort of legal or regulatory hurdles with creating a governance token, with registering other entities, things of that nature. So just at a high level, right, the kind of overview I'll start with is essentially what happens is in this kind of a system, we use the NFTs that we want to be the one NFT, one vote type of reference to create a Plutus, to create a ballot, right, that is essentially a new NFT through a Plutus minting policy. And then that ballot is recorded into a ballot box. On the flip side of it, once you're ready to count the votes, you have an authorized vote counter who pulls from the ballot box, records the votes, and then disseminates to their community off chain. So it's hybrid on chain, off chain. The first transaction where the vote is actually cast and the ballot is created is the on-chain portion. And then once it's on chain, it can always be replayed later. But the authorized vote counter is able to collect all the ballots and record. So here's something I mentioned earlier, right, around the genesis of this, but there are governance tokens out there. And so I want to say that those exist. Those, there are lots of precedents in this ecosystem. I think Agora might use governance tokens, could be modified, but essentially did not fit this need because there are a few issues. So first of all, governance tokens that are attached via airdrop require min UTXO ADA. This is a consideration for a lot of creators. I think a lot of standards that come out sort of default to thinking of one asset as one asset, but when you're talking about a PFP collection with several thousand assets, for me to do a governance token would have taken several thousand US dollars at the time I was looking to do it. Secondly, fungible tokens don't have a one-on-one mechanism for tracking votes against specific assets. Now this becomes less important in anonymized settings, but in a community like the one I've built, like I have a lot of stakeholders that really identify with their PFP. And so if I see who's voted based on their PFP, I can actually reach out to them and say, oh, this is exciting. I didn't know you wanted me to build this. So there's actually the inverse of anonymity, where these tight online communities where people are identified would love to have a way to track back to that original vote. And then last but not least, I don't love the idea of receiving input from people who have just purchased a governance token and aren't actually invested in the artwork in the community. I think one big thing about these online communities is that incorporating feedback is really about getting the community who have believed in you as a person and as a project to do this, right? I do this in my spare time, right? I mine fiat. And so for me, like the most important thing is not oh, a governance token. It's how do I get feedback from the larger group who believe in me and the mission. So I just want to kind of highlight that in solving those problems, there are some really great use cases. There's some really, use cases I would just say don't do this, right? So I would say the easiest one is like, if you have an NFT community, PFP or whatever have you, and you want an exact one-to-one vote, this is great for that use case, right? You can do things like you can reject an invalid vote option because you can essentially say inside of your Plutus minting policy, what are the valid ballots to be cast? You can create super votes. So if someone proves that they own, the ultra rare asset, they can then get 10 times the ballots, right? It's really nice for these existing communities that have NFTs to go based on those references and craft, unique votes. What it's not intended for is first and foremost, fungible tokens. So for instance, if I don't know, pick a big project, if World Mobile Token wanted to get a consensus vote against their token holders, because those are fungible, this is not intended for getting feedback and votes on them. I also think it's not really intended for a DAO structure, right? I think there's a lot more that goes into thinking about that. And obviously that's, again, an area I've just stay out of due to my jurisdiction. So I would say this is really more like, how do we get feedback fast and get these on-chain votes from the community and not use something kind of hacky like Discord. So let me walk you through the steps, right? So when you think about this, I know we talked earlier about there's some maybe Eastern European contingents on this. So I'm less familiar with the Eastern European sort of way of voting. I think, Germany in that area obviously has the federations. And so I think there's sort of an analogy at that level. But obviously this applies to how we vote for presidents in the US. It's kind of like a traditional, simple ballot box example, right? So when you go and vote at a ballot box, you go to a vote polling location, right? And this will analogize here. So you go to your polling location, you pick up a valid ballot, right? You make your selections, only one of the valid ones or a write-in if that's allowed. And then you submit your ballot to a ballot box. I know when I vote, it's an optical scanner, right? It just scans in the selections and automatically casts it. For other people, it's hand counting, right? But there's sort of this ballot box drop, right? And then on the back end, once the votes are ready to be counted, so polling places, maybe they close at 10 p.m. local time, someone will either go in and count by hand, someone may view the results on a piece of software that has automatically counted it, right? But there's a kind of second step of vote counting. So that's exactly the method I wanted to do here. Essentially what happens is you put up a website or some sort of interface to create a transaction. That's kind of your polling place. We use wildtangz.com/vote. You can do whatever you want as an NFT project. And essentially the creation of the ballot is a holder will send the reference NFT to themselves and will create a new NFT with the Plutus minting policy. So the Plutus minting policy is really important because in a single transaction, it both validates the actual reference NFT was sent to itself and creates the new on-chain record of this vote. So the NFT is actually a ballot, but you have to then attach a datum, which is the vote. So there's one NFT created, there's one datum that's inlined or however you want to attach it. And that's like when you get your ballot, you mark down with a pen, right? What your selection is. That ballot NFT is then sent to a ballot box, which is just a smart contract. The smart contract can be anything you want it to be. It can be, hey, just let the authorized vote counter redeem it. That's what we use, right? So we say, hey, the WildTangz wallet can redeem these ballots and do whatever we want with them. You could do much more complex logic where redemptions have to essentially send back the ballots to their owners, right? It's as complex as you want to go with the ballot box logic. And that's just for flexibility's sake. The nice thing about Cardano is that steps 1 through 4 actually can occur in one transaction, right? So what I love about Cardano is I include in the Plutus minting policy sort of like a set of logic that checks what was sent to self, creates the ballots based on that send to self, mints new ballots in the same transaction, and sends those newly minted ballots directly to the ballot box. all one transaction, low fees, right? Then polls close at a certain time. What I recommend is that you put your polls close as a piece of logic in the Plutus minting policy, so that you can verify on chain that ballots cannot be created after the polls close. And then you, once the polls close, essentially redeem from the ballot box. So what we do at Tangs is we redeem all valid votes from the ballot box and redistribute them to their owners, right? So that people can, in our case, we sometimes do commemorative art. So we'll like give them back the commemorative NFT with their vote and the metadata. You know, you could, as a project, you could burn that and you could reclaim the ADA. So you could actually use votes as a way of funding, kind of like a poll tax, which again, I don't like doing personally, because I don't want to create any barriers, but that's a very valid use case here. You could leave them in the ballot box so that people can always know what the final tally was, if that's your case. I mean, the bottom line is, once the ballot NFT has been created and the vote has been sent to the ballot box, because that datum is there, it's been recorded on chain, and anyone can use any off-chain tools to just verify that. So here's a little bit more on the ballot casting process. What I recommend in the standard and can be extended is that when the ballot minting policy, which you can see at the top right here, is created, it has three components essentially. One is, what is the reference policy, right? What is the actual thing that's allowed to mint a proxy ballot? When do the polls close? Again, not strictly required, but recommended, because then no new ballots can be created after that time. And then essentially a one-way asset name mapping, how you can trace one-to-one. We can discuss whether that's desired. You could, you obviously can change it so that that's not the case, and then you can conceal votes slightly more. But I recommend a one-to-one asset name mapping, so that ballot number one maybe corresponds to WildTangz number one. Right? At the left side, you can see what I recommend putting in the vote datum. So I recommend putting in the voter, so that you can return the ballot to them at the end if you so choose. But the vote field is required, because the vote that's the actual subcomponent of what their actual vote was. Now, the flexibility here, which again goes to kind of the standard, I don't want to overprescribe how people are collecting votes, is we've seen, when I was talking to other projects, we saw a lot of interest in ranked choice voting, for instance. So the vote does not necessarily have to be a free text string. It could also be an object with the ranked choices, right? It can be vote of abstain, right? It doesn't have to be free text. It could be an empty vote to say, I'm not voting, but I voted, right? I mean, there's all sorts of ways I think this can evolve. And so we leave the vote as required, but flexible. And then last but not least, I've included pseudocode. It's not, it's pretty close to validly compiled Helios.js, but it's essentially showing you that the minting policy would be something like, the polls are still open as validated, the ballots are validly minted, and the assets were locked in the ballot box, right? And this this kind of concludes the vote, right? And then, if something passes that validation on the Plutus minting policy, you can be assured that it is it's correctly sent in as a ballot. So this part is very flexible, right? This is what I recommend from a ballot counting perspective, but again, not fully required. The ballot box that I have in the pseudocode is very simple. Is the person who's redeeming this able to redeem this? Is someone who's counting the WildTangz ballot an authorized vote counter? You could, again, do something more where you say the context dot is signed by expected signer and the ballots are sent back to the appropriate user. You can extend this as much as Cardano will allow you to extend this, right? So what I've shown you here in the pseudocode down below is a little bit of JavaScript. It's off chain and it actually uses Lucid, which I know is a wonderful library I use, put out by Spacebuds. And what it does is it essentially scrapes the UTXOs at the ballot box. It goes through every single vote it finds, which each UTXO will represent someone's vote that they've sent in. Finds all the assets, right? Because of the efficiency of Cardano, one person may vote, but they may have voted with multiple assets, and then essentially counts it, right? This one does it in most recent order, so you can overwrite your values. You could also have it where only the first vote is honored for a specific asset type, right? There's lots of ways that you can enforce the off-chain mechanism. But then this essentially becomes the sort of code as proof that you're counting it correctly. And this code should be replayable by anyone to do their own off-chain vote tally and to verify that the results are not being messed with. So before I stop for questions, because I know I've laid out a lot here, I just want to talk about some disadvantages. You know, this is definitely a system with trade-offs, and so I don't want to pretend like there aren't trade-offs. You know, one thing that we've heard is that a lot of projects are concerned about token proliferation, right? And especially when you're doing commemorative art. Like if I send back a commemorative ballot that looks like a Tangs, people have expressed concern that then that would be misinterpreted as an actual Tangs. Now, obviously, I try to do things like verify through JPEG store. I try to make it so that there's no issue here in terms of how the tokens get distributed. But because each ballot is now a new NFT, you potentially have some token proliferation. And so if you're looking for just more lightweight stuff rather than polluting your user base, you might want to look into something like a Discord bot. The second is, excuse me, a secret ballot, right? If, you know, I would say that there are workarounds for this. Obviously, you can encrypt the vote on chain, but we know that encryption when it's stored on chain is long-term not a good idea due to potential quantum computing that could come out and decrypt the votes, right? So I would say that it's not really intended for secret ballots, right? That's something you'll want to do off-chain. And then last but not least, like wishing for anonymity in your votes, even if you have the asset name mapping be highly obscured, because the ballots have to be sent to themselves, or excuse me, because the reference NFTs have to be sent to themselves during the creation of the ballot, there's no real anonymity in which assets cast it and which wallets cast it. That's all pretty traced. So it's intended to be a very public system. And I just wanted to call that out. So how are we doing on time? I didn't know if folks wanted to watch a YouTube demonstration. We can jump to questions.
Oh, we're pretty good on time. If it's not too long, I think we can go ahead with the demo.
Yeah, sure.
Let me see if I can. Oh, hold on. Okay. So I think it's let me look. I think it's the first 8 minutes. So let me get a new share. Share sound. So Zoom might not let me share the audio. Is there any way I could paste the link in the chat and one of you might be able to share it?
You should be able to, you have to stop your screen share and start it again with audio. You should be able to do it with audio.
Let's see. So how about, so can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see it, but there's no audio. So I think you need
Yeah.
to take Peter's advice.
Say that again.
I
Oh,
said, I
okay.
think you need to take Peter's advice for stopping the screen sharing and restarting it with audio.
Oh,
Yeah.
reset. Okay.
Yeah, you can share sound. You have to check a box in the bottom left-hand corner of the
Yeah,
basic share
I
window.
did do that. I think. Let me try one more thing because I wonder if it's.
You can throw it in the chat and I'll drop it in over here. And
Yeah, let me try one more thing because it just stopped playing. Yeah, see, now it's not even playing in my headphones. It had me install a driver, so I think there might be something wrong with my drivers on my computer. Sorry, guys. Let me throw it in the chat.
No worries, man.
So while you're pulling that up, Tyler had a good question. Is it possible to show that you have voted without disclosing which way you voted? So I think that goes kind of to the disadvantages, the secret ballot portion. I would say that, you know, you could encrypt the votes on chain. If there's quantum resistant encryption technology that you have access to, you know, so be it. But I've always felt that from a philosophical perspective, anything on chain is not secret. But you know, obviously I know that's an ongoing debate that people way smarter than me are trying to figure out.
Right. Let's do
We'll
it.
watch the first 8
8
minutes here.
minutes.
Yeah.
This is Oddest Human Dad.
Good on the
I'm
audio?
here today to talk about
Perfect.
the voting tools for the WildTangz community. We're conducting on-chain voting, and I'm going to walk you through how that works. So I'm here at the wildtangz.com homepage, and from here you can either go directly to wildtangz.com/vote, or under Tangs Tools, there's a new option at the bottom that just simply says vote. So I'm going to click there, and you're going to see at the very top this new ballot, right? So up here we have a description. It is about the wife beater trait renaming. It gives you a little time about when the polls close. They close at October 28th, midnight UTC. I would encourage you to get your votes in about 15 or 20 minutes before that at the very least, so that you don't run into any blockchain synchronization issues. Obviously, this is all enforced on chain, so you will not be able to create ballots after that time. But for now, you should have plenty of time, given that there's 15 days left. So if I look here, I can see that the ballot is underlined, right? So I hover over that, and it pops up a little tooltip explaining what's going on. And I'll talk about this more in detail as we go through it. But the basic premise is that votes are occurring on chain by minting one ballot NFT for every WildTangz NFT that you hold. So if you have 5 WildTangz, you'll create 5 ballots, and those ballots will be new NFTs, which will be sent to a ballot box. Now, voting below will require you to sign transactions that create these NFTs, but you will never be required to have WildTangz leave your wallet. So if there is a site asking you to send your WildTangz to vote, that's phishing. We will never ask you to send in your WildTangz. The on-chain verification occurs by having you send the WildTangz to yourself as sort of a proof of ownership. So please do not get scammed, right? And the last thing is see the YouTube tutorial. That's the video you're watching. So if you have more questions, always refer back to this, but never send in your WildTangz. That would be a phishing scam. We can do that verification without requiring you to send those in. Okay, so let's read more about this ballot, right? In the original WildTangz collection, there's a trait called clothing, which has more than 10 unique values. One of these values is called wife beater. Right, this is a common phrase that I grew up with, especially in the American dialect. It's essentially meant to refer to an undershirt, but it has had a kind of deleterious meaning. So I thought it would be best for the community if we had a discussion about whether this attribute should be changed due to the potentially sensitive nature of the term. So the question at the end of the day is, should the clothing trait value wife beater be changed? And if so, what should the new value be? Note that we're not a DAO. This is not intended to be used for DAOs. There are lots of tools out there for governance tokens and DAO management. These are merely advisory votes. And I think it'd be fun to have on-chain verification so that the votes could be completely replayed. But these are not intended to be legally binding. So before I click vote now, I just want to show you the section down here around prior ballots. These won't be real-time results. This is not like a Twitter poll. I'm not looking for this to just kind of be a quick vote and then you see what's happening live. What these are going to be more sort of formal ballot counting, polls close, and then at the end, I'm going to show you how we walk through and count all the results. But for now, you'll just see votes not counted yet, and then once the vote has occurred and the polls have closed, we'll put a little more detailed information here about the distribution of votes. So, okay, so I'm ready to vote on the wife beater trait renaming. So I'm going to click vote now. And what you're going to see is this little pop-up, and it's telling you how to cast your vote, right? The first thing you'll notice is that you have to connect your wallet to display the eligible votes. So before you connect your wallet, all of these choices are grayed out. You can't click any of them. And if you try to vote now, it'll just say, please connect to wallet. So I'm going to close this, and you can use Eternal, Flint, Nami, any of these choices here, but I have a Nami with the WildTangz handle in it. So I'm going to connect my Nami wallet. And now when I click vote now, it'll pop up and it'll actually show me how many WildTangz are in there. The ballot choice below will have 7 votes as power. In the future, I'm potentially thinking through ways so that you could split your vote. If you have 7 votes, you can split 3 over here, 4 over here. For now, you could split them between wallets and just switch which wallet you've engaged with. And so that'll do 3 votes at a time, then 4 votes at a time. But for now, the entire wallet's voting power is all done at once. So the options here you'll see have been proposed by the community. So wife beater would be no change. Undershirt KQ, that's for King Qualia. That's the one recommended by the team. There are things like A shirt, beater, tang top, all sorts of fun choices here that you can look through. So I'm going to do the one recommended by the team. I'm going to click undershirt KQ, and then I'm just going to click vote now. Before I do this, I want to explain how it works a bit more again. So I have 7 WildTangz in this wallet. So the 7 WildTangz will prompt the creation of 7 new ballot NFTs. So these are 7 new assets, and we're going to see what they look like. But these 7 assets are really intended to be the proof that you have voted. So right as you create them, the ballots are going to be sent to a smart contract, which is kind of a ballot box. And then at the very end, once all of the ballots are in the ballot box and the polls have closed, I'll show you how counting the votes work. But for now, I'll just click vote now, and it's preparing my ballot. And then we'll see the familiar NAMI wallet pop up here, right? It's telling me I'm going to have a transaction. This amount of ADA should be low, right? It should be 1, 2, 3 ADA, right? It's really just used for fees, and which is a little bit higher in this case because we have some smart contract interaction. But in addition, it's going to be used to lock up the min UTXO with these ballots. Now, for this, say 2.5 ADA, right? I'm going to lock up 7 assets with 2.5 ADA inside the ballot box. When the votes are all counted, I will get those back, right? So this is actually 2.5 ADA that you'll spend, but you'll receive back with your commemorative voting NFTs. And then we'll talk later about how you could unlock or reclaim that ADA. But for now, all you need to know is this should be a very low dust amount. You can see that I'm sending 7 assets and 2.5 ADA right over here, and I'm sending it to this contract. So I'm going to pull up this, I'm going to copy this contract, and I'm going to pull it up in pool.pm. I believe I already have it up, but let's refresh the page. You'll see there's nothing there, right? So this is an empty ballot box. There are no votes. So if I go back to my vote page and I see all of these, right? All this metadata here. What I can do is I can actually show what's going to happen when I mint these assets. Now, for the technical folks in the audience, this is CIP 25 metadata. It's just like the WildTangz NFTs. But the metadata is not actually used to vote. I'm putting together a community improvement proposal, which is going to lay out how the vote works. The vote occurs entirely on chain without the use of metadata, but this is just a fun little way that we can get some commemorative NFTs out of the process. So if you take a look here, this is the ballot that you're going to send to the ballot box, right? So again, none of this metadata is used in the actual vote counting, but it's kind of fun. It shows you what the WildTangz that did the vote was. It's going to show you what your vote was down here. And if you ever change your vote later and recast your vote, you can do that. And this vote attribute will change. So, it's really a fun way to get back something to show that you voted, kind of like an I voted sticker or a signed signature proof of voting. So I'm pretty comfortable with this transaction now, right? I see the 3 ADA going out. I'm not losing any WildTangz assets. That would be a phishing transaction. And I'm minting 7 new assets that go to this contract. So I'm going to sign this here. And when I go back to the web page, I'm going to see this little pop-up that I've successfully voted in this transaction. So we can look at this transaction on Cardano Scan or C Explorer like we normally have. And you'll also see this message here. Your vote has been cast successfully. When all the votes are counted, you will receive a commemorative NFT recording your vote. You may close the form now. So I'm going to close the form. And if I click vote now, that vote's still, it's going to tell me, hey, you already voted. But I can come back at any time, right? So
we can pause it here. Perfect. Okay. So that vote went through, and the winner was Tang Top. So I renamed all the assets Tang Top. All right, so I think that's it for my end. Would love to open it up to any questions you guys might
Yeah, I have a question to start us off, kind of in line with the progression of your video. Can you tell us more about how the reclaiming of the ADA happens after the votes are counted?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I did with my NFTs in the smart policy, in the Plutus minting policy, is I essentially used Helios.js to create a line of code that says anybody can burn any vote. So if you receive that airdrop back of your 7 cast ballots, I created a little way on the website that you could click a button and it would pop up a transaction to burn all of your ballots. And then when you burn all of your ballots, your ADA essentially becomes unlocked because it's no longer needed for min UTXO.
Right, the UTXOs go away. Cool. All right. Yeah, what about, does anyone else have a question?
So just to clarify, the reference NFT stays in the contract until the end of the vote. It doesn't get released as the commemorative NFT until the vote is done.
The ballot NFT does not. Yeah, the reference NFT stays in your wallet. The ballot NFT stays in the smart contract.
Oh, so the reference NFT is basically the original NFT.
Correct. Yes.
And what happens if you cast a vote and you sell the NFT, or you purchase an NFT, cast a vote and you sell it? Because this is one of the points you mentioned you wanted to avoid.
Right. So if you cast a ballot and then you sell your NFT, the person who purchased your NFT can go to the website and overwrite your ballot because they then prove ownership. So basically, because it's cast on chain and it has the datum, I set up my vote counting logic so that the most recent vote wins. So if someone sells it before polls close and the buyer updates the vote, they win. So it's always attached to that reference NFT.
But the buyer needs to be actively casting a new vote.
Correct. Yes, they need to understand that there's a new vote. Yes.
And
otherwise,
also,
the old vote will win. Yeah.
And the commemorative NFT also goes to the original owner in the case they resell it without a new vote being cast.
Correct. Correct. And actually, what's nice about mine, the way I did it, just because you can send the old commemorative NFTs to the new owner. I just send the commemorative NFT to whoever cast it. So if you cast a vote, sell your NFT, someone else buys it and they cast a vote, each of those people will get a commemorative NFT. But the metadata for the NFT, because it's CIP 25, will only reflect the most recent vote, as well as the most recent vote being counted on chain.
So you basically, this way you end up with more commemorative NFTs if this situation happens. I imagine it's not
exactly. Yeah.
Not
exactly.
too often.
No, it's a very fair point. And honestly, the whole notion of a commemorative NFT is just because I have fun with it. If you didn't want to do that, obviously you could have a ballot box where instantly the ballots are burned, right? And that's totally fine as well, because in this scenario, like if the ballots are burned instantly because the datum already was sent in, you can just replay it forward on the blockchain history.
And this also would solve, the burning would also solve another point you raised, which was the dilution of the collection.
Exactly. Correct.
Burning, there's no commemorative.
No commemorative anything. Correct. Yeah.
Sent?
Regarding the possibility to do multiple votes. As I understood this proposal, you get NFTs that are named according to your original NFT. I was just wondering how do you manage the naming of the second vote, so to say, in the NFT?
Yeah. So if multiple votes are cast for the same NFT, because the asset name is 1-to-1, right? It'll just overwrite that NFT. It'll become essentially a fungible token. So if you have 4,444 NFTs, which I have, right? there's only ever going to be 4,444 names because it's a one-to-one mapping. Right?
Yes, of course.
So the fungible token will just have the latest datum, and then if you do a commemorative NFT, it'll have the latest metadata as well. But that's how we manage avoiding duplicate votes.
Yeah. So yes, thank you. Makes sense. So when you have casted your second vote, you can burn your first to get back the ADA that you have.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Great, thanks.
Yeah, the way I set it up for my holders is on the second vote we did, I think people didn't want to accidentally burn all their ballots. So I basically added a script that detected if they had multiple of the same named ballots, and then I let them burn to free up the menu TXO there. I mean, again, we're sort of talking like very small amounts of ADA that were menu TXO locked, but just sort of for cleanness and for people's peace of mind, I would allow multiple ballots of the same name, the additionals, to be burned.
I was also thinking about when you're doing votes that could actually be about value of some sort, like for example Catalyst, that you make sure that people can't interact and view what the results are at this point in time. Have you looked into making use of encryption or something like that to make sure that at least for some time ahead, not for indefinitely, but
Sure.
some time to keep this a secret?
Yeah, I mean, I personally haven't, but I definitely could see that. Now, the problem there, the only thing I'll call out is like if you encrypt this with someone's, like if you use asymmetric cryptography, right, and you encrypt votes with a public key, then when you go to decrypt them with a private key, you then need to expose that private key in order for others to validate the vote after the polls close. So the only recommendation I have there is there should be some sort of protocol for how these keys are created that are intended to be insecure after some period of time. I'm not as familiar with encryption on that, but if you really want to verify, you would need to at some point expose the manner of decryption. If that makes sense.
Yeah, good solution. I think it would be good enough then for you to publicize the public key that you have used when encrypting. But yes,
yeah, you'd have to expose the private key related to the public key and then just mark that as something you never use again.
Yeah, so not make use of your wallet.
yes, don't sign with your wallet. That's true. Yep.
Thank you.
Good question.
So you have a vote up right now, looks like, for platform development in 2023. Is that, this is inactive? This is closed now.
So that one, yeah. So that one is closed. That was our most recent vote, but it has the burn extra ballots button. If you, and here, I'll just, so people know what we're talking about on the recording. Let me share my screen because there's no audio on this one. So wildtangz.com/vote right now. This was our second ballot. It was I think it was like a month or two ago. And it was a very similar concept of how the first one went. You just kind of selected which one you wanted platform development to focus on. Mobile app was the winner. And then if you scroll down, you can see here are the results of the Tang top vote. And then here were the results of the mobile app vote. Or I'm sorry, Creator Studio one. Creator Studio was the winner.
Yeah, this seems like a cool environment to see all of your stuff displayed. I like your design. These are your patrons of sorts that get to vote on your on the art that you create, and well, but you're also creating these tools, which is the art, another form of art in of itself.
Right,
Um,
right. These are the meta cheese. That's right.
Meta cheese. That's funny. Yeah, I think that it's interesting that you're talking about like like it's not quite anonymized with a PFP, but people like you don't people aren't worried about. I feel like we have like Patreon has a lot of the customers to Patreon have a relationship with their creator, and the creator has information about them. So that's very similar to just having a PFP. I don't see a lot of I see this translating very well from like the Web 2 Patreon into this more Web 3 where you work around the PFPs instead of more like your formal name in terms of how you would with Patreon or whatever, or an email.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, for me, Web3 is kind of this new concept, right? But like the whole notion of a community did exist in Web2. And I think we can push it. Like there's no way on Patreon to like show everyone that you had this many votes cast, because then you'd have to display your customer list. Whereas
Do
here
it
you can
securely.
do it securely on the blockchain, right? So I love technology that bridges Web2 concepts to Web3. That's definitely what I view this as.
Yeah, I see that this is a really crisp version of that. I love what you got going on, man. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And yeah, if no one else has any more questions, do you
Yeah, I would have another question. So
Sure.
you mentioned some specific custom tools that you haven't implemented, or versions of this that could be very attractive, let's say, to other projects, like weight based voting based on rarity of the NFTs, and
That's right.
customizing your voting power, allocating it to different options in a ranked choice voting environment. So for a project with not so many technical abilities, how hard or easy would they be to take your standard and implement them, implement it for themselves?
Yeah, so the standard and all the code is open source, and actually even the WildTangz votes I've done are all open source. So you know, if you need links to that, my personal GitHub, Thaddeus Diamond, is the one where all this is hosted, and we have links in the Discord as well, and I think on our website too. So wildtangz.com, you should have access to all the open source. You know, the tricky thing about this standard is that it does require Plutus minting policies to be verifiable. So you do need to know how to write Plutus code. I personally have written a lot of stuff in Helios.js because I really like the way it integrates with the web framework that I use. I actually just use Squarespace, and then I use a bunch of custom JavaScript, including Lucid. But a project looking to do this would need, at the very least, to just have kind of a basic understanding of how to build a Plutus minting policy, no matter what the toolkit is on that.
sounds good.
But I encourage people, by the way, I've heard this before, like, you know, this is an open source standard, right? So if there's a tool set that's going to be built on this, would love that, right? I personally haven't had time. I have a community, and I wanted to give as much as I could back to the community here. So I have prioritized other efforts in our community, but would love to see this be like a community standard or community website to host these for sure.
That'd be very cool.
Since you're a smart contract developer, how hard or easy did it seem to you, the implementation?
Well, the folks over at Helios, I mean, I find that to be one of the most groundbreaking things in Cardano, to be quite honest. I know Aiken is now working on stuff like that as well. But the key thing, so my background, I was a developer. I studied Haskell in college, and I did a bunch of back-end work right after college, and I don't code in my day job anymore, but I used to. So for me, you know, if you have 5-10 years of experience, you can figure out Plutus. But what Helios and Aiken are trying to do is essentially make any web developer Plutus proficient. And to really get to that next level, I think that's what we need. I found the JavaScript stuff to be extremely enlightening, and just like, you know, now that I can, in kind of a JavaScript like language, have 4 or 5 lines and then I get a smart contract, it's huge, huge game changer.
Cool, yes. Cent, what do you think? Or you have no comment?
Yeah, I think from what I could see, at least, it looked to be not too difficult. So good job with the standard and the simplicity. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So to also do this in native Plutus should be easy.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, Thaddeus, thank you for coming. And if you have any last thoughts or anything you'd like to say here at the end, let people know where they can find you. Yeah, let us know.
Yeah, just huge thank you. I mean, I love doing this with the community. It's the reason I do this in my spare time. You know, people ask why, and it's the other people I get to interact with. So thanks for reaching out. Come join us, and you know, don't have to own the NFT, don't have to tweet about it, right? It's just wildtangz.com or discord.gg/wildtangz. We love builders, so hopefully I see you all around.
Hell yeah. Well, thanks for coming. Peace out, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.